Today we're talking about the power of your brain. And no, we're not getting into just think positive and everything will work out. No, I'm not that chick. Your brain is a very powerful machine. And you know how they say we only use 10% of our brain's capability? That is incredibly true. And when you start to use your brain with intention, you can control outcomes a lot easier than when you're just sort of walking through the world mindless. Okay. So, what I'd like you to do, here's your homework for the day, is to research brain waves. And a really good program about this sort of thing is the Silva effect or the Silva. Just look up Silva brainwaves and it'll all come up. There's actually a company called Mind Valley that has relicensed this older teachings and have brought it back into the public circle. I think the membership is like $100 a month, but probably worth it. I'm not a member. I couldn't tell you, but I know that the Silva effect is exactly what I'm talking about. So you might as well just take their program because I don't teach it. But basically, this is stuff I've learned over the years because I was lucky in that when I was in my early 20s, I had a boss that was studying to be a hypnotherapist, a clinical one. And she needed so many hours of practical clinical time in order to get her diploma or whatever it was, and she used me. So in the process, I ended up learning a lot about hypnosis, and it's something, and the brain as a indirect result. And the results in my life have been fantastic, where half the time I feel like a magician. And people are always flabbergasted at the things I'm able to accomplish, most especially professionally. And I attribute it all to using my brain with intention. So basically, as you may already know or not, your brains operate at different frequencies. So when you're in the delta mode, for example, you're usually in a very deep sleep. When you're in theta mode, which is a very important mode that we'll discuss a little bit, that's when you tend to get inspiration. So when you're stuck on something and then you go to take a shower or whatever, and all of a sudden, boop, it plops in your head, that's because your brain at that moment was in theta mode, and theta mode is attributed to the brain space you need to be in order to receive eureka moments. Let's put it that way. And then you have your alpha mode, and that's the mode you get into, let's say an athlete before they take their big shot, that's the alpha mode, right? So even if you're in a debate or whatever, where you have to really focus and concentrate, you're in alpha mode. Now, when you're able to control the brain waves so that no matter where you are or what you're doing, you can get yourself to the brain wave you need in that moment, you become a really powerful human being. Because while everybody else is getting upset or flustered or confused or stuck or whatever, you're able to circumnavigate those moments mentally, internally, and effortlessly. And I mean that in a very real and literal way. So when you're able to do that, you can mentally outperform everybody you're competing with or everybody you're around. So you become the person with the next idea that fixes the problem. And as a matter of fact, the training of my brain in this way since my 20s is what leads me to be as high functioning as I am, and why I'm the consultant that I am, why I'm able to strategize so well, especially in election time when everybody's freaking out and running on adrenaline all the time. In these moments of panic is when I get my best clarity sometimes and my best ideas. But first, before I get into the part of the conversation, which is the theta brainwave convo that I want to have with you, I want to give you a really quick tip. When you wake up at 3, 4 in the morning, you ever have that happen where in the middle of the night you tend to wake up, and that might happen for a few days consecutively? Never ignore that moment. Rumi used to believe that was the universe trying to tell you something. Now, I'm looking at it in a more scientific way, which is that your brainwave was in delta mode just prior to that. So you were at some point sleeping, and your brainwave had gone into delta mode where you received some kind of prompt. Something happened in your brain, you received an inspiration, or your brain figured something out, and the sheer joy of that moment internally woke you up. So when you have that moment, don't roll over and try to go back to sleep, or try. And then if you don't fall asleep in 5 minutes, get up. Get up. I know you're going to be really tired the next day, but get up and spend an hour by yourself in some kind of meditation. And I'm not saying necessarily just sit there quiet in the void, because not everybody can meditate that way, although very powerful and worth you learning. But what I used to do is pace. So let me give you an example of how this sort of thing can really affect your life, okay? I was going through some industry regulation. There was some monopolization happening in my industry. I just didn't know it. This was all happening behind the scenes, higher level things in foreign countries. So this was not any information that I was privy to. But what I was feeling was the ripple effect of that on my daily operations at home. So there was all this tension and trouble with, because we were in an export industry with these exports and regulations with the municipalities, and everything was getting really tough and toxic. And I didn't understand where all this resistance was coming from. So I started to put my energy towards learning about the global industry, not just the little part of the industry I was in locally. I started to study the global industry and what was happening, what were the trends that were happening that were having this negative impact on my business. And sure enough, the one night I woke up at 3, couldn't sleep anymore. And but remember, I already know, because since my 20s, I know if I'm being woken up in the middle of the night, my brain's figuring something out. So when that started to happen, I got excited because I knew I was in the middle or in the beginning stages of getting my big eureka moment. So I would force myself to get up and I would pace. I'm a pacer. That's how my brain works. That's how I get into theta mode. So I got myself into theta mode, which we will discuss in a second, and I would pace for an hour or two. Now, beautiful thing is I ended up losing weight immediately because I was pacing. I ended up checking and I was pacing the equivalent of about 3 to 5 kilometers in the middle of the night. I probably wore a path between the kitchen and my living room. And I would just pace, and I would put on music that really allowed me to brood. I got into a really brooding phase. So I would pace in the middle of the night, back and forth. And if anybody was looking in the window, they probably thought I was losing my mind. But my brain would sometimes it wouldn't go at all. Like I would just focus on the music. I would just get my brain to that level and I would just keep pacing. And then one night I went to sleep, and before I woke up in the middle of the night, what I heard was something to the effect of Nigeria. And then the thing Nigeria came up, and some other word that I forget now what it was, but it was a big trigger. So I woke up thinking, what the hell does that have to do with anything? Because remember, I'm only knowing about my local industry at the time. I still hadn't learned the global implications of my sector. So when I heard Nigeria or whatever it was in Africa, and I thought that's really weird. So I started to study my industry in that country, only to realize that the biggest global player of that industry was actually operating out of that country. And that kind of raised a thing. And then I had an inspiration, like an intuition, to go on LinkedIn and make a comment about the industry in that country. And it was almost a prophetic comment. It landed in my brain. You know how a musician says, I didn't write that song, it just came through me? This remark, and it was a sarcastic remark, literally just plopped in my head. And I didn't even fully understand what I was saying. And it was a very prophetic comment, it turned out to be, about how trade tensions in Africa were going to have a negative impact on our industry. And people here not only weren't talking about it, they didn't even know, because this conglomerate overseas was so powerful. They had their tentacles in the global industry and people weren't aware. So I made this comment on LinkedIn, which at the time made me look like a crazy person. But wouldn't you know that maybe 3 days later, something like that, the president of one of the countries that was implicated in my comment made a comment publicly that they were going to put or add tariffs to our export, which was going to bludgeon the industry locally. And there was like infighter trading, or they were warring with a neighboring community, and it happened to be the border that we would pass our exports through. And then that was going to complicate our shipping. And so now everybody looked at me like, how did you know that? And I didn't know what to tell them because I didn't know how I knew that. What was I going to say? I got woken up in the middle of the night and the words landed in my brain, right? So I ended up looking like a prophet of the industry over something that plopped in my head from seemingly nowhere, from the ethers, that turned out to be true. So we are more powerful than we realize when we utilize our brains in that capacity. So what is this theta brainwave I'm talking about? Theta brainwaves happen when you're not paying attention. So you're awake, but you're operating on autopilot. So that happens when you're doing routine things that you've done so many times that your muscle memory takes over. Have you ever driven home and then forgot the ride home? Has that ever happened to you? That's your brain was in theta at that moment. So you were planning what you were going to do next week, or thinking about something at work, or imagining, something great of the next vacation you're going to take, whatever. Next thing you know, you're home, right? So theta brainwaves happen when you do things that you're very familiar with, that you do every day. Take a shower, wash the dishes, take a walk, drive, ride a motorcycle, exercise. These are all things that your brain will go into these moments of being completely quiet, because you're completely not even focused at the task at hand, because you're so familiar with it, you don't have to focus it. You could do it with your eyes closed. So your brain can just kind of relax. So here's the issue. And this is often talked about in prayer, right? That there's two forms of prayer. There's the talking part, but then there's the listening part. And if you don't give the space to listen, you're not going to hear anything. So if you're so busy saying, please, 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 then there's no silence for you to get the answer in. So if we translate that to brain function, if your brain is constantly in awake mode or in beta mode, where you're moving and you're talking and you're thinking and you're in, and then you're getting input stuff, right? So Facebook and Instagram and the news and your mother and everything, your brain's doing that. It's not thinking clearly. It's surviving and it's getting you through the moment, but it's not really being inspired. It's not being creative in any of those moments, and therefore you're not getting the great ideas in those moments. Often, do you notice, if you're back in the day when you were writing essays in school or writing a report, and you hit a block and you don't know how you're going to approach the next paragraph? Well, they would say, get up and take a walk. Get up and do something else. That's what all the brain productivity experts tell you, right? Get up and stretch. Well, that's because they're trying to get your brain into theta mode. So yeah, you're right. Get up and do something. Do something mindless. Do something that requires very little concentration on your behalf, that gets your body moving maybe, especially if there's something that's cyclical, the hearing of footsteps, the running of the water, anything that kind of puts you in a quasi-hypnotic stance. You will notice that when you're not thinking about the issue anymore, or the report or the paragraph, suddenly the inspiration will come. You'll have the aha moment. I know how to broach this, and then you're ready to run back to the computer and the rest of it will pour out. That's theta brainwave mode. That's a very important mode for you to be in. But it's not the only mode you need to study. Because remember, as a politician especially, you are put in inhumane conditions of pressure and combativeness, right? So you're going to do a lot of debating. You're going to do a lot of, spinning things in your head. Your opposition might put out a really good motion that the public's going to love, and you're going to have to find a way to convince them it's not a good idea. That requires huge mental energy. And by getting into the theta brainwaves mode of learning how to navigate alpha brainwaves mode for the moments that you really need to be engaged, right? So there's no washing dishes when you're in a debate, right? You're in the moment and you got to rock that moment. You want to be in alpha mode when that happens. You don't want to walk into a debate in a different mindset, right? You want to walk in alpha mode so you can kick the ass of whoever you're going to deal with. So that happens when you're fully aware and present of your brain waves, and you're able to actually control them. To say, right now, I'm in beta mode, but if I want to do well, I need to be in alpha mode. Let me, 3, 2, 1, here I am. Okay? So I want you to learn. Your homework today is to learn about brain waves and how to access the different brain wave modes, the types, and how to use them to your benefit. And it is a bit of a rabbit hole to study, which is why I'm not doing the overarching class on it, because this requires a lot of training, more than I'm going to be able to tell you here. What I'm giving you here is a very important lead to say, okay, so for the rest of the day, this class is short, 15, 20 minutes, because I want you to spend the rest of the time you would have listened to me yammer. I want you to study brainwaves and how to access different brainwaves, most especially alpha, theta, and delta. How to really, because delta, that's miracle stuff. Delta is when people reverse diseases with their mind. That's delta mode. So if you can learn that, even better. But delta is the hardest of the things to actually capture, because delta happens when you're in a deep sleep. So that's really hard for you to control in a waking state. It can be done. It can be done. Study about that. But really, if you can even just get your theta brainwaves and your delta brainwaves on lock, you will find life a lot easier. You will find success a lot easier. You will trigger synchronicities and intuitions that work your way. You're going to look like the luckiest person that ever lived when you're able to control your brainwaves in that way. So please spend the rest of your day today down the Silva method rabbit hole. Look up Mind Valley, because they really do know their stuff when it comes to this, and check them out. And like I said, I don't make any money off them. I have no affiliation with them at all. It's just the Silva method is world renowned for the study of theta, delta, and alpha brainwaves, your brain in general. And I know that I had the benefit of not that specific training, but likely very similar from my hypnotherapist when I was younger. And I've been using these methods or similar methods my entire life with amazing success. And enough for me to make this its own little thing in this program, just to say, hey guys, you have to learn about your brain waves. If you can learn that, that is a skill that is absolutely 100% invaluable. Remember, in politics, your brain is your entire thing, right? It's all about your brain, because your brain is the one that's going to control your messaging, how you handle every moment, how you strategize through your career. You don't have a job where you're punching a card every day, hitting the same 3 buttons, and then going home, right? Politics is a very nuanced, ever-changing, complex mind trap of a career. So you want to have your brain operating in its best optimal capacity at every single day that you're operating, because every single day is make it or break it in the political world. So really having a control of your brain and being able to utilize your brain in all the different ways that will be of benefit to you will only help you succeed. So I hope I'm as adamant as I need to sound right now to really get you to do this part of the homework, because it will change your life, literally. Okay, have a great day.